I believe that when we think of spiritual multiplication, we need to first consider whether or not we are disciples worth reproducing. You see, I don't believe God is interested in multiplying mediocrity. I believe He's looking for children that He wants to multiply. When I think of biblical characters who God thought were worth multiplying, one of the first ones that comes to mind is Abram, or Abraham later. Probably that's because he's considered the father of our faith, and the promises that God made to him, that his descendants would be as numerous as the grains of sand on the seashore or the number of stars in the heavens. And as I look at Abraham's life, while he did plenty wrong, he had plenty of shortcomings, I do see a consistent pattern in his life. That was a pattern of immediate, radical, costly obedience. We see this first in chapter 12. In chapter 12 is when God calls Abraham, and He calls him to leave his country and his family and his father's household to go to a land that God will show him. And Abram obeys. He gives up the comfort, the convenience, the familiarity of the city life that he's grown up in, and sets out to wander in the wilderness, living in tents the rest of his life. Immediate, radical, costly obedience. In chapter 17, this is where God gives Abraham the sign of the covenant, which is circumcision. Now, apart from the obvious physical sacrifice involved here, this is also a big security risk. We see later where his great-grandkids wipe out an entire tribe when they are all circumcised on the same day because they're helpless to defend themselves while they're healing. But Abram does not hesitate. It says, in the very day that God commanded him, he circumcised himself and his son Ishmael, and every male born in his household, and every male bought with his money. And then it repeats it for emphasis. In the very day God said to him. It was immediate, radical, costly obedience. We see this again in Genesis chapter 21. This is where Ishmael is mocking Isaac, who's been born by this point. And so we're told that Sarah got upset, and she told Abraham to send away Hagar and Ishmael, kick them out of the home. And we're told that the matter troubled Abraham greatly because of his son. But God said to him, listen to the voice of your wife Sarah. It's through Isaac that your seed will be named. I'll also make Ishmael a nation and multiply him, but Isaac is the son of the promise. So listen to Sarah. So we're told that he rose early the next morning, gave them a flask of water, and sent them on their way. Even though it troubled him greatly because of his son, he obeyed. Immediate, radical, costly obedience. We see the same thing in chapter 22. Chapter 22 is where God asks Abraham to sacrifice his son Isaac, to kill him. I can think of so many possible responses. Yes, Lord, if you allow me to bring back Ishmael. Yes, Lord, as soon as you give me another son to replace Isaac. Yes, Lord, if Sarah agrees, so on. But he didn't say any of those things. He said, yes. We're told he rose early the next morning, saddled his donkey, loaded it with firewood, and set off for the mountain where God had shown him he was supposed to do this. Immediate, radical, costly obedience. His whole life was bound up in the life of this son. He had waited 100 years for this son of promise. And yet now, God's asking him to sacrifice this boy. That is immediate, radical, costly obedience. And that is an expression of loving God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength. If you love God like that, the natural outcome, the natural outworking of that is immediate, radical, costly obedience. And that is the kind of disciple God delights to multiply. I'm not saying if we don't have that level of love that God can't use us. God used Balaam's donkey. God can use anyone. But I am saying if we don't yet have that kind of love, if we don't yet show that kind of love by that type of obedience, we need to aspire to that and not be satisfied with anything less, because that is what God desires from us, and that is the kind of disciple he loves to multiply.